All right, folks, welcome. This is Rage Quit with Travis, and I, of course, am your host, Travis. Today I'm going to be giving you a tip for beginners in Mordhau. This is going to be the first in a series of 3 tips, and I think this is going to be helpful. I am only a level 36, so I'm very much a beginner myself. However, despite being a beginner with only about 100 hours in the game, every once in a while I do pretty well and end up on the top of the leaderboard. Sometimes I end up at the bottom of the leaderboard, but I do well enough that I feel like I can give some tips to the beginners since I remember what it was like starting out. So here we go. Here is the first tip. Be able to identify what your opponent is doing. I know that sounds self-evident. You're probably saying, Travis, obviously I need to be able to understand what my opponent is doing. But what I mean there is you have to understand or be able to identify what kind of offensive action your opponent is taking. In Mordhau, there's only 8 offensive actions that your opponent can take. There's the overhead strike, the horizontal strike, and the underhand strike on the left and the right, so that's 6 actions. And then there's the thrust for the 7th action, and then the kick for the 8th. However, in order to be able to take those offensive actions, you have to survive long enough to return on to the offensive. And there are only 2 defensive actions you can take. You can parry or you can chamber. If you're advanced, you can dodge. I'm not any good at that. As a beginner, I think you should focus on parrying and chambering. Parrying is simple enough, but chambering you cannot do unless you can identify the direction and the kind of strike that your opponent is employing, which is why it's so important to practice identifying what your opponent is doing. So we're going to show you 3 videos where you can see just how fast these events are occurring and how knowing what your opponent is doing allows you to chamber, which then allows you to go on the offensive much quicker than parrying and then attacking, which is also known as the riposte. So I've slowed this footage way down so you can see what happens, but I end up in this little fight against this guy under this structure. I'm going to break down for you how it goes. So he does a left swing, I parry, I swing at a post. Then we do this awkward thing where we both parry. I thrust, he chambers, and I see that, so I back up and parry. I do right swing, gamble, get lucky. Left swing, he chambers. He does a right swing, runs into the post. I do left swing, he parries. He does a left swing, I parry. I do left swing, he parries. He does left swing, I chamber. Don't connect. Waste an opportunity there. Thrust connects. Left horizontal. He tries to parry, and then he runs out of stamina. And then he kind of embarrasses me for a bit by just swinging away at me, and I cannot seem to finish him off. Pretty good footwork on his part, and then I knock his block off. So here we have another fight with lots of chambers. So he goes right swing, I left chamber, he right chambers, I left chamber, he ducks and misses. Then right swing, left chamber, ducks, and does an underhanded stroke that I missed. I misread, so that's why he got me. And then we've got this third video, which I had to slow way down. You're going to see a repost overhead strike morph to thrust right here. And I had to slow it way down because it happens so fast. So I had to slow down those videos to about 50% speed to be able to talk through the actions that were happening. Obviously, you can't do that while you're playing. So what can you do to get good at recognizing what your opponent is doing so that you can react in a way that benefits you? In this regard, I have 2 recommendations for what you can do to recognize your opponent's actions. The first is saying out loud or just thinking it to yourself what you're observing your enemy doing, just like I did in those previous 3 videos. I'm not a neurologist or a scientist or any kind of ist, but I believe that these will help you build the neural linkages or whatever they are between what you're seeing and what you're recognizing so that you start building that pattern recognition that is going to become useful to you. And the second, more drastic recommendation is that you can just simply unbind parry so that you no longer can rely on parrying and you are forced to chamber any attacks that are coming your way. This is going to force you to recognize both the direction and the type of strike that your opponent is employing. It's also probably going to get you killed a lot, so it's going to be very frustrating because if you don't chamber, you'll get hit and eventually die. And finally, just like your mom always told you, you should wear a helmet.